The twin suns of Zareth burned bright above the grand arena. Thousands of aliens filled the stands, shouting, cheering, hungry for blood. Flags waved in the air, drums beat like thunder, and fire danced along the edge of the battlefield. This was no ordinary day. This was the day when Princess Alrena's champion would fight to defend her name and her royal pride. She sat high in the royal box, her silver dress flowing around her like water. Her golden eyes were cold, her back straight, and her lips curved in a proud smirk. Her champion, the beast of Zareth, stood below her. A 10-foot-tall monster covered in black armor and scars. He had never lost a match, never fallen, never bled, not even once. Today, another fool had challenged him, a human of all things. The crowd laughed when the human stepped into the arena. He was average in height, wore no armor, held no weapon, just a short blade at his side. He had no claws, no horns, no fur, no exoskeleton, nothing that looked dangerous. He walked calmly across the sand like he didn't even hear the insults being shouted at him. Princess Alrena leaned forward, curious. She had seen many warriors die, but this one looked different. The announcer's voice echoed through the air. By ancient law of Zareth, today's fight will be to the death if the human wins. The laws of the arena will be honored. The victor will claim the prize of the royal court. Everyone laughed again, thinking it was impossible. But the human didn't laugh. He bowed to the princess, low and deep, then turned to face the beast. The gate behind the champion slammed shut and silence fell. The drumbeat stopped. And the signal was given. The beast of Zareth roared, charging forward with the speed of a thunderstorm. Sand flew in all directions as the creature's giant arms swung toward the human. One hit would break his bones, but the human didn't run. He moved fast, like a shadow, sliding under the attack. Then he slashed, just once. A small, clean motion. The crowd gasped. Confused, the beast stopped. Standing still, then suddenly, blood poured from its stomach. A deep line cut through the armor. It staggered, let out a choking sound, and then it fell in two pieces, split cleanly from hip to shoulder. The crowd went silent. Princess Alrena stood, her eyes wide. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Her champion, undefeated for 10 years, was dead. The human wiped his blade and stood tall. Looking directly at the princess, he did not smile, did not boast. He simply waited. Alrena's heart pounded in her chest. She remembered the old law written by her great-grandfather. If the royal champion falls in the grand arena, the victor shall be granted rights over the royal house. No one had ever expected it to happen. It was an ancient tradition, half forgotten, buried in dusty books, but Zareth law was sacred, unbreakable. Even the princess could not change it. The council of elders gathered quickly. Whispering in panic, some wanted to declare the fight invalid, others feared dishonoring tradition would spark rebellion. All eyes turned to Alrena, waiting for her word. She couldn't believe it, this human, who looked like nothing, had just won everything. Her heart burned with anger and shame, but under it, something else stirred curiosity. Who was this man? And how had he done it? Why had he bowed before the fight? And why did he still look so calm? She raised her hand, silencing the arena. In a clear voice, she said, Zareth honors its laws. The human is now bound to our royal court. He shall be taken to the palace, and the law shall be fulfilled. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. The human nodded once, then walked away. Guards following him closely, Alrena sat down slowly, her fingers tightening on the armrest. This human had turned her world upside down in seconds. She did not know his name, but she would find out, and when. She did. She would decide what to do with him. For now, one truth echoed in her mind, louder than the drums. He killed the champion with one strike. Asterisk, the sun had set behind the stone towers of Zareth's capital. Torches burned along the palace walls. As the human was led through golden halls, guards stayed close, weapons ready, sure if they were escorting a warrior or a threat. The whispers had already spread through the city. The human split the champion in half. He now owns the princess and her royal court in the throne room. The council of elders had gathered in secret. Their faces were old and twisted with fear. Some wanted to deny the law. Others knew breaking it would destroy the thrones. Honor? Who would have thought a human could even read the law? One whispered. Another said, he knew what he was doing. He came for this. Princess Alrina stood beside her throne, her arms crossed, her face calm but cold. Her mind was anything but calm. She had studied ancient Zareth law as a girl. She remembered that passage buried deep in the war scrolls. It was written during the Blood Wars, when only the strongest could rule. The law was made to scare invaders, not to be used, but now it had come alive again, because of him. The doors opened and the human entered the throne room, still calm, still silent. His eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but with purpose. Alrina's eyes narrowed, watching him closely. He didn't look like a conqueror, but he stood like one. A counselor stepped forward and spoke the words, "By ancient law. The victor of the grand arena may claim the royal prize. Do you, outsider, invoke this law?" The room held its breath. Everyone expected him to shout, to laugh, to demand. The women, or throw insults. But instead, the human simply nodded and said, "I do, and I will honor it." His voice was calm, deep and full of control, not wild, not greedy, just certain. The counselor stepped back in confusion. Alrina finally spoke, her voice sharp like a blade. "You used our laws to trap us. What do you really want?" The human looked at her. No fear in his eyes. "I came with knowledge, not war," he said. "Your champion was strong. But he fought with rage, not reason. I studied your ways, your rules, your history. I came to win the right to stand before you, not to take what is not given." The entire hall fell silent. Even the guards lowered their weapons slightly. The human didn't ask for anything more. He just stood there, letting his words settle into every mind. Princess Alrina felt her chest tighten. This man had read the law, understood the tradition, and planned everything. He hadn't stumbled into power. He had walked into it, step by step, and now, even though he had the right to command her, he didn't. Why not just take your prize? She asked, voice quieter now. "Because if I take it, I become like the monsters your ancestors fought," he said. "But if it's given, then it means something more." That answer hit something deep inside her, something old, something forgotten. The room buzzed with whispers again. The human had not only beaten their champion, he had honored their laws. Better than they ever had. One elder finally spoke, his voice trembling, "Let the law stand. But let the court choose how it is honored." The others nodded, and Alrina did not object, the human. Now standing alone at the center of Zareth's power simply said, "Then I await your decision." He bowed again. Not as a servant, but as a man of discipline and purpose. The guards stepped back. And for the first time, Alrina didn't see him as a threat. She saw him as something far more dangerous. A man who played the game better than anyone else. And in the shadows of the hall, something began to shift. A new path was opening. And no one could predict where it would lead, not even the human himself. The human was given a room in the eastern wing of the palace. It was usually kept empty, meant for honored guests who never arrived. Now a single human walked its long, silent halls. And every servant watched him from the shadows. They expected him to act like a conqueror, loud, proud, maybe even cruel, but he didn't. His first request wasn't gold, wine, or women. He asked for a translator, some scrolls, and quiet. The guards exchanged confused looks, unsure if he was joking. He sat cross-legged on the floor, reading old Zareth law as if it were a holy book. Every hour, he took notes and drew strange symbols no one could read. Words spread through the palace like fire in dry grass. The maids whispered behind doors. He hasn't touched anyone. He didn't even look at the princess. Maybe he's broken. Inside, Princess Alrina heard every whisper, but she said nothing. Instead, she sent her most trusted majorlet to watch the human. Really was loyal, sharp, and quiet. The best eyes in the court. She slipped into the shadows outside his chamber and waited. Hours passed, but Cain didn't move from the scrolls. He read about Zareth's ancient blood codes, sacred rites, and royal customs. He even corrected a translation mistake, the palace. Scribes had ignored for years, really returned to the princess. Her face pale. "He's not confused," she said. "He understands us. Maybe better than we do." That night, Alrina sat in her private garden, staring at the moonstone fountain. The air was cold, but her thoughts burned like fire. Who was this human, really? Why study their ways after already winning? Was it strategy, or something more? In the morning, Cain made his second request. He asked to see the city not as a lord, but as a traveler, with only 2 guards and no carriage. This stunned everyone, but the council allowed it. He walked through the markets, spoke with merchants, and even helped a child lift a heavy basket. He asked questions no outsider ever asked. How do your people choose leaders? What happens when the harvest fails? What do your children fear? When the guards returned with him, they looked different. One of them whispered, "He listens. He treats us like we matter," said the other. Alrina watched it all unfold. She expected fear or chaos, but what came instead was curiosity. The palace staff began speaking to Cain more freely, responded with respect, always learning. One evening, Cain requested a meeting with the princess. In her chamber, surrounded by glowing crystal lamps, she faced him. Her guards stayed near, but she raised a hand, telling them to wait outside. She wanted to hear him clearly. Cain stood tall, his face calm. "I understand your laws," he said. "I understand what I could demand, but I don't want that. I want to belong, not rule through fear." Alrina tilted her head, suspicious. "No human seeks power without wanting control," she said. He replied, "I don't want control. I want understanding. That is real power." She studied him for a long moment. No tricks in his voice, no hunger in his eyes, only purpose. It unsettled her more than any demand could have. Later that night, Alrina looked out her window at the stars. She had seen many warriors kneel, many men fight for her favor, but this one did not kneel, did not beg. And yet, he was winning, not with weapons, not with law, but with something more dangerous: patience. And deep inside her, she knew this was not the end. This was just the beginning. The palace library had been untouched for years. Dust coated the shelves, and old knowledge slept behind silver-locked scrolls. Now, the human named Cain walked its aisles like a ghost from the past. He opened scrolls with care, studied battle records, and read royal history faster than most scribes could speak. The royal advisors watched him from behind curtains. They said nothing aloud, but their thoughts burned like fire. "This is no random warrior," whispered one. "He knew our laws before he entered that arena," said another. "Who studies the enemy's customs before declaring war." Princess Alrina called for her high informant, an old shadow spy named Marin. "Find everything about this human," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "Where he came from, who trained him, and what he's truly after." Marin disappeared into the night and returned 2 days later, but this time, the truth he brought was not what she expected. "He's not just a soldier," Marin said. Laying down a cracked datapad, he was a commander in the human frontier. War's tactical genius, decorated and feared, but he vanished after his final mission. Rumors said he disobeyed orders to stop a massacre. Alrina took a breath, her mind racing. "So he's not just smart, he's dangerous," she whispered. Marin nodded. "He came here for a reason, and everything he's done was part of a larger plan." That night, Alrina couldn't sleep. She walked the palace halls in silence, her thoughts chasing shadows. Why would a human like Cain risk entering Zareth alone? Why study their law, their language, their weakest points, unless he wanted something no blade could win? Respect, authority, or maybe redemption. The next morning, Cain did something that shocked the council. He requested to speak before the assembly of clans. It was a sacred space, reserved only for native bloodlines. Outsiders were forbidden from even stepping near it, but Cain walked in with permission from the princess herself. Gasps filled the hall as he bowed, not low but with strength. He didn't beg, he didn't apologize. He spoke in clear Zarithian tongue, shocking even the elders. "I do not ask to be king," he said. "I do not ask to own what is not mine, but I understand your ways, your strength, your pain, and I am not here to take. I am here to stand." The room stayed silent. No laughter, no whispers, just stunned. Respect, Cain bowed again and left the hall. Behind him, many elders looked at each other. Uncertain now, for the first time they saw not an invader, but a mirror. Alrina sat alone that evening, watching a memory on her holoscreen. It showed her champion huge, brutal, proud, falling in one clean strike, and Cain standing still. Blade at his side, eyes full of silence. It was no accident. It was precision. It was a message. He didn't come to break their world. He came to be part of it, but only on his terms. She poured herself a drink and looked at her own reflection. What did it mean if a human could become more Zerithian than the royal blood itself, and if she allowed him into their world? Would he reshape it, or would she be the one who changed? The answer didn't come that night, but something else did, a feeling she could no longer ignore. Cain was not her enemy, and maybe, just maybe, he was. Never meant to be her servant. Princess Alrina stood on the palace balcony, arms folded, her eyes locked on the gardens below. Cain was there again, training with the palace guards, bare-handed, moving like a wind through steel. He didn't fight with rage like Zareth warriors. He fought like a man who had already seen death and learned to step around it. Alrina hated how often she watched him now. She told herself it was caution, nothing more. He was still a threat, still a stranger, still the one who took her champions. Life, and yet there was something else, something she couldn't silence. Her maids had changed too. They no longer avoided Cain. They spoke to him freely, laughed near him, and some even trained beside him one day. Really returned from the garden with flushed cheeks and said he teaches without shouting. He never shows off, and he listens. Alrina dismissed her with a wave, but the words clung to her. This human had every right to demand her, to rule her court, even to humiliate her. But instead, he offered patience, and in doing so, he was claiming more than the law allowed. He was claiming hearts. That night, Alrina walked into the Hall of Echoes, a quiet place where only royalty could go to reflect. Cain was already there, seated on the floor, watching the flickering lights on the marble walls. She should have been angry, but she only asked, "Do you have no respect for space?" Cain looked up, his face calm. "I thought this place welcomed thought, not just blood," he said. "I can leave." Alrina stared at him for a long moment, then sat across from him, not speaking for several breaths. Finally, she said, "You confuse everyone. You won by law, yet take nothing. You hold power, yet act like a servant. What is it that you want?" Cain's eyes met hers not. Sharp, not soft, just steady. "I don't want to rule people who hate me," he said. "I'd rather wait until they choose to walk beside me." The silence that followed was not cold, it was warm, thick, heavy with questions. For the first time in her life, Alrina felt something she could not name, not fear, not anger, not desire, something more complicated, something dangerous. The days that followed, she tested him. She invited him to high dinners, placed him next to rivals, asked him hard questions. He never flinched, never lied, never pretended. When a general insulted him publicly, Cain didn't draw his blade. He only said, "You fear me because I didn't follow your script." Later, that same general requested Cain train his own son. Things were changing fast, and so was Alrina. She started walking through the gardens alone, hoping to bump into him by accident. She asked her maids to stop reporting every detail about him. She already knew more than they did. Then came a moment she didn't expect. Cain stood in the corridor near her chamber. Waiting silently, Alrina raised an eyebrow. "Lost?" she asked. He shook his head. "I need to say something." Her pulse quickened, though she kept her face still. "What?" Cain took a breath, then said, "If you ever tell me to leave, I will. I came to be part of something, not to steal it, but I won't pretend I don't see you. I see you more clearly than anyone else ever has." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, because deep inside, she knew what he meant. For all her strength, her walls, her titles. She had been invisible to everyone except him. That night, she didn't sleep, and for the first time, she didn't try to understand the human. She simply wondered what it would be like to choose him, not because of law, not because of honor, but because of something her people had always denied, something they once called weakness. But she now saw as power. The moon hung low over the end. Royal gardens. The glowing flowers of Zareth shimmered like stars fallen to earth. Soft wind moved the leaves. But something else moved through the shadows too, something colder. Sharper, silent. Princess Alrina stood near the water fountain, her hands behind her back, waiting. She had sent a message to Cain earlier, asking him to meet her here, alone. But as she waited, she felt that something was wrong. The air was too still, the guards too far, and her instincts screamed danger behind the garden walls. 3 shapes crept silently, cloaked in shadow, masked in silver, trained killers from the House of Kortha royal family's oldest rivals. They had one mission: kill the human and send a message to the court that no outsider, no matter how clever, could take what belonged to Zareth's bloodlines. Cain was already walking the garden path, unaware of what waited, but something in his steps changed. He paused, crouched low, and touched the ground. His fingers brushed over a broken petal cut, not fallen. He didn't call out, didn't panic. Instead, he stepped off the path and melted into the dark like a shadow born from the stars. Alrina turned, just as a blade flashed behind her, but it never reached her. Cain moved like lightning, tackling the assassin mid-lep. He hit the ground hard, steel clashing in the silence. Another assassin charged, but Cain spun. Using the first attacker's body as a shield, a poisoned dagger missed him by an inch. Slicing through air, Alrina backed away, her heart pounding, watching the chaos unfold around her. The final assassin came from behind, silent, fast, brutal, but Alrina had trained once long ago. She grabbed a fallen dagger and turned with fire in her eyes. Steel met steel as she blocked the strike, giving Cain just enough time with one final move. He flipped the last attacker onto the stone floor. Blood stained the grass, but Cain didn't deliver the killing blow. He stepped back, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on the survivors. "Leave one breathing," he said. "I want them." To carry a message, the remaining assassin crawled away, wounded but alive. Cain looked directly into his eyes and said, "Tell your masters. I didn't take power from this world, I earned it, and I follow your laws better than they ever." Alrina stood silent for a moment, then walked toward Cain. His arm bled, but he didn't flinch. She reached out, her fingers touching his wound. "You could have let them kill me," she said. "I wouldn't gain anything from your death." Cain replied softly, "Only loss." For the first time, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Why do you keep choosing mercy?" Cain looked at her with calm eyes, "Because mercy is the one thing your enemies never expect." That night, the council gathered in fear. Assassins in the palace meant rebellion, betrayal, danger. But the tale that spread faster than the blood on the floor was the truth of what Cain had done. He didn't run, he didn't rule, he protected, he defended, and more than that, he spared the life of a man sent to kill him that earned something no law could give. It earned loyalty, even from those who once hated him. Alrina returned to her chambers in silence, her hand still shaking slightly. Tonight, Cain had not only saved her life, he had also stepped beyond warrior. Beyond rival, he had become something much harder to fight, a protector, and maybe even something more. Something her heart was slowly starting to whisper, but the words still scared her to say out loud. The next morning, the palace was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after blood has been spilled and choices must be made. Princess Alrina stood alone in the Hall of Truths, a place where every ruler of Zareth had once made their final vows. She wore no crown today, no jewelry, only a simple royal robelite, soft and without armor. She didn't need armor anymore. Not for what she was about to do. The council waited outside, whispering, the law was fulfilled. They said, the human had won. He had survived the arena, the politics, even an assassination attempt. But now came the real test, her decision. Cain. stood at the far end of the hall. His shirt was torn at the shoulder where the blade had cut him, but he stood tall, unshaken, not as a conqueror, not as a king, but as a man waiting for a truth he had earned, not stolen. Alrina stepped toward him, her voice calm but strong. Every ruler before me chose strength over peace. They chose tradition over change. She stopped a few steps from him. I'm not like them. Cain said nothing, only listened like he always did. She took a slow breath. You could have demanded me by law, taken me without choice. You? Never did. I hated you at first, she continued, because you beat what I thought was unbeatable. But then I watched how you walked among my people, how you treated my maids with respect, trained my guards with patience, and spoke to my enemies without fear, and I hated you more. For not being cruel, for not fitting the image I wanted you to be. Cain's eyes never left hers, and still he stayed silent, because he knew this moment wasn't his. To take it was hers to give. I thought strength was in swords and blood, she said, voice softening. But you taught me strength is in restraint, in choosing the harder path. You stood before me as a victor, but never acted like one. You saw me not as a prize, but as a person. Alrina reached up and slowly removed the royal sigil from around her neck. The silver chain slipped through her fingers. I choose not, because the law says I must, she whispered, but because I want to. She stepped forward and placed her hand over Cain's heart. You are no longer a stranger to Zareth. You are no longer an outsider to me. The doors behind them opened, and her maids stepped into the hall. Riley was first, followed by the others, each wearing royal silk symbols of the concubine court, but none of them bowed. They stood as equals, proud heads high, because this time they were not claimed. They chose. The council watched in silence. There were no protests, no objections, because everyone in that hall knew this human had changed Zareth not through force, but through honor. Cain reached for Alrina's hand, his fingers warm against hers. I don't need a throne, he said quietly. I just needed to know someone would see me. She smiled for the first time, not as a ruler, but as a woman who had found something unexpected, not power, not law, but belonging. Together, they turned to face the light pouring through the stained glass. It's not as warrior and princess, not as human and alien, but as equals. And the galaxy would soon whisper a new tale. The human who split the champion in half, and won not with a sword, but with patience, wisdom, and choice.